The critical performance appraisal of Nigeria's budget and budgeting system encompasses several key aspects, including revenue allocation, budget implementation, and expenditure patterns. Nigeria's revenue allocation formula allocates 52.68% to federal government, 26.72% to state government, and 20.60% to local governments. However, experts question whether the expenditure patterns in Nigeria, particularly at the subnational government level, have really translated meaningfully into economic performance, leading to high rates of employment, infrastructure development, reduction, and poverty rates. Well, let's look at all of this around the budgeting system. I'm being joined by a chartered accountant and also a lead consultant and chief executive officer, 2612 Consulting and Professional Services. Mr. Peter Adebayo, thank you so much. It's good to have you on the program.
Thank you once again, Tolu, for having me.
Yes.
I hope you enjoyed your last conference.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much.
That's a very good one.
It's good to have you in. Budget performance in our country, it's a big one. And when we spoke off the camera to speak about this, I said, where do we really start from? What do you make of our present process of budgeting? Where are we where we should be?
Thank you once again, Tolu. That's a very pertinent question, expected question. To respond to you, I would probably want to look at it from three different perspectives. I want to look at it from the perspective of the structural framework of our budgetary system. I want to look at what I call the regular features. The regular features of our current budgeting system. I will look at the effects of our perennial deficit budget financing over the past years. We'll look at the way forward, and we're going to be signing off. Now, the starting point is, if you look at the budget system of Nigeria as a nation, the structural framework is with the budget office of the Federation. You know, the budget office of the Federation is under the Ministry of Budget and Planning.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I'm starting from that because where there is no vision, you know what is going to end it. And the budget office has a vision and a mission. And that vision specifically is to be a world-class technology-driven budget institution. That's the vision of the budget office. Of course, gears towards promoting fiscal responsibility, transparency, accountability, right? That's the vision. And of course, the mission says precisely to provide efficient and qualitative, you know, that word is there, qualitative functions to Nigeria in a manner that will harness resources in the interest of achieving the corporate objectives for which that budget is meant to achieve. Now, that's the structural framework. And that would take me to what I call of course, the structural framework. I don't have any problem, because when you look at it, there are about 6 or 7 different units that make up the entire structural framework of the budget of the Federation under the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. So I don't have to bother about that. Now, there are things that I call features of the current Nigerian budget system. And the question to ask is those features that characterize the Nigerian budget system, whether indeed those features are capable of achieving real economic development for Nigeria. One of them is, if you take a look at Nigerian budget, I will be taking, over a few minutes, I will have to look at a few statistics. I probably will be using statistics from 2018 till 2023, which is the current year, you know, to drive on some of these points. And you'll notice that one fundamental feature of the Nigerian budget system over the past 10 years, of course, you know, subject to, you know, further criticism, we've been consistently, perennially driving our economic development with deficit financing system.
True.
All right? Yeah. So that's number one problem. The question is, must it be so? The answer is no. Right. Number two, if you look at Nigerian budget system over the past 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, there has been hardly a year when there will not be supplementary budget. And when those supplementary budgets come, more often than not, there are not supplementary budgets that are coming arising from, oh, we have been able to generate extra revenue, but that we need to spend more. I mean, look at 2023 budget. 2023 budget, when it came, was about 21.5 trillion.
Yes.
At the tail end of this year, I think about 1 point something extra budget was passed to the National Assembly that now increased Nigerian budget for 2023 to about 21 point something trillion, right? Now, that's another feature. If you also look at the feature of Nigerian budget system, over the past 10 years, of course, I'm going to use the last 6 years as an example, you will discover that this debt service profile has been worrisome. That has also become an integral part of our budgeting system. These are issues that require urgent attention of the current president.
More than 90% is being used to service
our debt.
So what lifeline are we on?
Yes, in fact, it doesn't end there. If you look at the quantum of the capital expenditure portion of our national budget, you will agree with me that it is going to be very difficult for any nation striving for economic development to achieve real and tangible economic development with the quantum. Averagely over the past 6 years, I am not sure the allocated portion of our budget on a yearly basis, on an average, has been more than about 25-26%. Now, if you're having a budget of 100% where over 70% is targeted towards revenue expenditure, debt servicing, I don't see any magic that anybody can perform with about 25% or thereabout to drive economic development. Because economic development must be based on infrastructures. Of course, we have always talked about infrastructural deficits. Infrastructural deficits can only be attended to if a larger portion of our revenue is put in all of this. Now, if you also look at the revenue expenditure, which is what we call recurrent in the public service, the recurrent portion of our expenditure is another dimension entirely. Now, these are issues that we must be prepared to attack if we don't want to deceive ourselves. It's just like somebody earning income, and you've been earning income over the past 10 years, and a substantial part of your income is tailored towards consumption. There cannot be meaningful achievement as far as that person is concerned. The same thing applies to an economic entity. So we must be able to look at the quantum of budget that consistently has been allocated to the revenue portion of our national budget. And of course, there is the culture of impunity. Now, no matter how brilliantly prepared the budget might be, you want to agree with me, Tolu, that a budget may be brilliantly created or prepared, but what determines the success level of that budget is going to be implementation.
Yes.
Which is what we call implementation. That's execution of the project.
Okay.
All right. Now, there is $1 million question to be put forward to how our budget has been implemented over the years. You have been reading up on the pages of newspaper every now and then. Somebody has been here. This is 10 trillion today, 1 billion. The question is, because people have realized that culture of impunity arising from the absence of implementation or application of the rule of law has more or less become an incentive to those who are supposed to be held accountable for the success of our budget system. Now, those are the things that characterize our budget system as a nation. Of course, what are the effects? The effects are numerous, quite numerous. Of course, like I mentioned, deficit budgeting has become the order of the day over the past years. And that has meant we've had to borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow. I know the impact. Unfortunately, the borrowing that we have been doing is said to be in the interest of national development. But I tell you, if you have to take statistics of those who understand, who will feel the impact, I am not sure 5% of Nigerians will feel the impact of all these borrowings. We understand we're here. We talk about debt. So this is no issue of debt.
Yes.
There is nothing wrong about borrowing. What is wrong about borrowing is, what are you borrowing in for? By the time we are borrowing, for instance, I don't have any problem if you give palliatives to state governments. State governments that you are giving palliatives to, or that there is a line, they call it, bailout. You are borrowing to bail out a state just to pay salaries. What is the economic value attached? Absolutely nothing. So these are some of the issues that we need to pay attention to as far as our budgetary system is concerned in Nigeria. So the effects are numerous, like I mentioned. Of course, you see, today, Nigeria is still dependent on, more or less, oil. Thank God for diversification into, taxes now. Even though the way we're handling the taxes, I can tell you, that's a discussion for another
day.
Yes, that's a discussion for another day. So the effects, unemployment, underemployment, social menace, insecurity, that are not incentives to our advocacy for foreign direct investment. You can see the young boys now, they practically lost hope in Nigeria. And that's why you see that majority of them, the only thing that comes to their mind now is what? They want to get out of Nigeria. So these are the issues that have to do with our budget system. Now, Tolu, I don't know for about a few minutes, if you permit me to support you with some figures,
Go ahead, please.
Yes. Now, in 2028, I'm going to look at 2028 to date. In 2018, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
In 2018, our aggregate income as a nation was precisely a little above 7 trillion. Now, that 7 trillion had an aggregate expenditure of 9.1 trillion.
Already in deficit.
Deficit of 1.9 trillion. That was in 2018. In 2019, our revenue crashed from 7-point-something trillion to 6.9 trillion. That 6.9 trillion, when our revenue crashed, our expenditure increased over and above what it was in the previous year to 9.1 trillion. Imagine us having 6.9 trillion revenue with expenditure profile of 9.1 trillion. That's another deficit of 2.2 trillion. Yes. So we are moving from 1.9 to 2.2. In 2020, that was the COVID year, we had about 8-point-something trillion revenue in aggregate. And that year, our aggregate expenditure was 10.3 trillion. And when we're talking about aggregate expenditure, we're talking about statutory reserve, debt service, recurrent expenditure, capital expenditure. All right? Now, that was in 2020. In 2021, our revenue crashed to 7.8 from 8.1. Now, with the crash in revenue to 7.8, would you believe that our aggregate expenditure in 2021 was 13 trillion? And that brought about a deficit financing of 5.1 trillion.
5.1?
Very alarming. In 2022, that was last year, our budget, aggregate expenditure, revenue was less than 11 trillion, about 10.7, thereabout. Of course, our expenditure profile rose from 13 trillion in 2021 to 17 trillion in 2022. Look at the trajectory. In 2023, we started with 9.7 revenue profile, right? And we're going to spend 20.5 trillion. As you and I are talking today, Nigerian budget for 2023 has risen to 21-point-something trillion.
Yes.
Now, one thing about budget is naturally in any traditional environment, budget administration is to be revenue driven. What do I mean by that, Tolu? You must establish what you have by way of revenue before you plan your expenditure. But in Nigerian system, we aggregate our expenditure
before we now
talk about revenue. More often than not, you discover that aggregate expenditure consistently, persistently, perennially, we've not been able to have a revenue profile, a projection that will be able to finance. At the end of the day, what do? There are two things. Is either we look for alternative revenue generation sources or we resort into what? Borrowing. And that's exactly what we have done. Now, if you look at the percentage of debt service, in 2018, we had 22%, 2019, 23%, 2020, we had 24%, 2021, 26%, 2022, we had 23%. 2023, already we're having about 33%. So in average, over the last 6 years, our percentage of debt service to our total expenditure is about 25%. Now, if you look at recurrent, 39, 48, 47, 40, 40. As of today, over the last 6 years, average recurrent expenditure is about 43%, which is very huge. All right? Now, if you look at CAPEX, which is supposed to drive our economic growth and development, that's where we have the problem. In 2018, we had 32%, 2019, 22%, 2020, 21, it moved to 28, 32, and 24. 2023, we have 24%. So, average over the last 6 years, our capital expenditure budget revolves around 26%. And this is not very palatable for an economy that is going to be driven by effective budget system. These are the issues that we have in our budgetary system. Now, we will take time to look at the...
Yes, time is already fast spent, but let's look ahead. What are the right things to be done? We need to get it right. Already there's a plan for 2024 budget. The president will be taking it to the assembly, both assemblies anytime soon. What are the flaws that we should not make moving on?
Now, the solution steps are going to be taken away from those features that I highlighted. The question is, must we, for how long, can we continue as a nation to be running our economy with deficit financing budget? That's a question. Now, if we know that what we are expecting is 10 trillion, let's discipline ourselves. Of course, we have to borrow. Not that we are expecting less than 10 trillion and we are budgeted 22 trillion. It doesn't make any financial sense. So we must show some degree of reality and objectivity. And I think as part of, when I was talking about the structural perspective to budget system, I mentioned the Budget Office of the Federation under the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. It is part of their functions to do what? To conduct evaluation of the performance of the budget. In other words, if you see where things are not going wrong, the question is, what can we do to ensure that we address those areas? So we must be prepared to look at those areas within our budget system. Now, diversification, it has been much talked about, beyond oil. Of course, now we're talking about the solid minerals and all of those things are there. Of course, we need to harness our untapped solid minerals. There is also a need for us to give attention to real economic issues without having to politicize development. And that's another fundamental issue that we need to add. Of course, we have to, in Nigeria, there is no, let me tell you, Tolu, there is no nation that attains economic development without attention to energy. The day we get it right in the area of energy in Nigeria, I can tell you our economic development will naturally be revolutionized. So government, particularly our current president, he must give attention to energy. Energy, we can't afford to get it. We have been on it for the past 20 years. And yet, as I'm talking to you before I left my house, over the past 1 week, we have not had light. So if you run like that as a business person, cost of business becomes high. So I want them to give attention to the issue of energy. So energy, of course, diversification, fiscal prudence, and the issue of indiscipline. And that can be achieved by what? By upholding the rule of law. Of course, we don't have a doubt. Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is there today. We believe he has what it takes in terms of capacity, to do what is right. Like I said, it is never too late for us to make a U-turn. The way we discover that the path we are toying will never take us to our destination. So, the president must be in charge, irrespective of whose us is God. Yeah. Rule of law must be made to what? To be in place. So these are issues that we must give attention to. If Nigeria, of course, Nigeria has potentials. There are potentials for us to be the best nation on planet Earth, if we can get it right in the area of budget. And that's why a lot of re-engineering, a lot of recalibration, a lot of reconstruction, objectively, must be done. 2 minutes. Yes. Budgeting cycle is also very, very important. Yes. The January to December budget cycle, which I think President Tinubu is ready to adopt. Now, the budget cycle has to do with the time of creation of budgets to approval, from approval to, implementation. Sometimes it's so long. It's so long. Well, I think in that area, I think we are getting better. Relatively speaking, I think over the years we are getting better. And I'm sure President Tinubu has the opportunity right now to stamp his authority in that area. Gone were those days when budget of a particular year will not be approved until about May or June. I have 6 months. Yeah. So thank God that has been tackled. We only will believe that President Tinubu, who we all believe in, will be able to do justice as far as these areas are concerned. Of course, if he can do what is right, I can tell you, Nigeria has a better chance of registering herself, in the Community of Nations as the best nation, not just one of the best nations, because we are endowed. I can tell you we are endowed. And that will restore the confidence of a lot of people in the hearts of Nigerians.
How do I put it? A section of the show is not always enough for Mr. Peter Adebayo to speak, but I must thank you so much. You really make sense of this. I will definitely have another face-off to talk about all of these issues that affect our economy. He is a chartered accountant, lead consultant, CEO 2612 Consulting Professional Services. Of course, a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants.
A fellow. And I'm proud to be a fellow of
I'm also a fellow friend of Chartered Accountants.
Yes, you are a friend of Chartered Accountants. Please make sure you carry that title.
Thank you so much.
Permission of the
I
president.
do have a great week.
Thank you so much, Tolu.
All right.
God bless you.
Well,